collapsing. Think of space shuttles exploding. Think of tigers jumping out of zoo cages. It makes me furious when these things happen and there's no reaction from the public. It's our duty to have a reaction, even if it's just for our own sake. The federal and state constitutions offer no protection for the people from mediocre and mendacious bureaucracies. Consider how old our constitutions are. They're older than any of us, the Minnesota Constitution, the US Constitution. They're drafted at a time we didn't have ever-expanding modern bureaucracies based on elitism and expertism. So what help are they to us today? A careful study of these documents would show the principal purpose of these documents, rather than just laying out procedures, was protect the minority from a tyrannical majority. But the fact of the matter is, today we need something else. We need protection as people from mediocre and mendacious bureaucrats. It's the people who are trying to run your lives that are the problem. It's not a tyrannical majority. It's a tyrannical, oppressive, overreaching modern bureaucracy. Neo-populists admit, along with British philosopher John Stuart Mill, that bureaucracies are necessary for a skilled democracy. We admit this readily. Yet the problem with bureaucracies is that by their very nature, they tend towards rules, routine, and therefore mediocrity. As the great British philosopher John Stuart Mill stated in his Representative Government, written in 1861, he already identified the problem. Bureaucracies perish by the immutability of their maxims, and still more by the universal law that whatever becomes routine loses its vital principle, and having no longer a mind acting within it, goes on revolving mechanically through the work it is intended to do, remains undone. You see, when bureaucracies get started, geniuses begin them, but eventually the geniuses leave, and then what we're left are rules and routine, and more rules and more routine, and eventually mediocrity. How many federal programs still exist that have long outlived their usefulness? When's the last time we had a vote on any of those long-standing federal and state programs? It just doesn't happen. And I point again to the publicly available evidence. Bridges collapsing, space shuttles exploding, tigers jumping out of zoo cages. Our opponents, the partisans and ideologues, will say, well, which of their rule of law applies? Well, for neo-populists, it is the people's rule of law that applies. There's no ideological fight over the rule of law. There's not a left and a right. There's simply the rule of law. And when the bureaucrats and the politicians violate the rule of law, then they should be held accountable. Similarly, there's no democratic rule of law or Republican rule of law. There's just the rule of law. When the Republicans or the Democrats violate the rule of law, they should be held accountable. Unlike partisanship, which is owned by the DFL and GOP parties, and unlike ideology, which is owned by the liberal and conservative elites, neo-populism is owned by the people. This ownership point is very important. It's a way for you to hold us accountable as we move forward. We never want to be ahead of the people. The people's law is embodied in the Constitution, in the statutes, and it's our job to point out when the legislators and the city officials are violating that rule of law. Further, our opponents will say there is no Minnesota conspiracy to violate the law. Neo-populists agree. But if there is a conspiracy, it is a conspiracy of mediocrity. That's right, a conspiracy of mediocrity. A conspiracy of mediocrity based on the bureaucrats' unwillingness to do more than do their job. And that is to be excellent. That is to comply with all the applicable rule of law, be it Constitution, statute, rule or regulation, ordinance. All of it is irrelevant to their work, and they need to do the hard work. It's not okay anymore for them to say, well, you may have rights here, but let the court decide. No, we don't want lawsuits. We want the application of law by public officials at the moment we deserve it. Even further, our opponents will say there's no absence of rule of law in Minnesota. That's false. And we have to use facts to disprove this, my friends. When I fought in the Minnesota courts, fought the Minnesota court and the Office of Lawyer Professional Responsibility and the Judicial Board, when I fought them over judicial campaign speech, and the rule passed by our Minnesota Supreme Court was, you judicial candidates, you can't announce your views on disputed legal and political issues or you'll lose your license. That was what the Minnesota Supreme Court passed, that the candidates running against them could not discuss disputed legal and political issues. No wonder why our judicial elections are messed up, because the candidates weren't able to speak about the issues. Now, we won that in the U.S. Supreme Court 5-4, but the point is, the lesson taken by the elites isn't, oh my, when we're drafting rules relating to political speech, we need to be careful because the people have rights. No, the lesson is, there's something wrong with judicial elections, so let's get rid of them as we know it. You know, it's turning it on its head. I mean, the experts are caught making a mistake, they don't concede the mistake, and they say that we ought to lose democracy. So in other words, it would appear that every time we catch the elites making a mistake, violating the people's rights, the penalty is we lose more democracy. That can't be the case in Minnesota. And neo-populists demand better from our government. On our website, neopopulism.org, we've documented 20 court opinions, cases that I've been involved in, that show that the government on a routine basis at every level violates the rule of law. I encourage all of you, lawyers and laymen, to think about how to bring these cases forward. Through lawyers, or we're working on a PAC. This would be a declaratory judgment action PAC. So if you're ever confronted with a conflicting, ambiguous, or self-contradictory ordinance or statute, and the bureaucrat won't tell you what it means, you will have a way to go to the court, and God bless the Minnesota's Declaratory Judgment Act, and you have an opportunity to place your claim before a judge and have it heard. Because we're tired of self-contradictory, ambiguous, and vague actions by bureaucrats. I see them all the time at my work. People see them all the time when they're petitioning the government for, let's say, adding addition to the house, or doing something with their dock in the lake, or Mr. Wurzel trying to run for public office. So don't tell me there's no problem with the rule of law in Minnesota. Minnesota Supreme Court, I've proven that they abandoned the rule of law. Now today we're going to start a mission to show the Minnesota State Legislature has abandoned the rule of law. There's plenty of evidence the executive agencies are abandoning the rule of law. So there are three branches, we've covered all three. So there's a problem. As Carl Llewellyn, a great University of Chicago law teacher, once said, morals without technique is a mess, while technique without morals is a menace. Don't tell the people of Minnesota that the Minnesota government isn't at the same time a mess and a menace. It is. What else could explain the hundreds, nay thousands of pages of self-contradictory, vague, and or ambiguous statutes, rules, and ordinances on the books? Even fishermen now contend with pages and pages of Department of Natural Resources fishing rules. Aren't these statutes, rules, and ordinances in themselves an abuse of power? Bureaucrats beware. It is the people who suffer due to your mediocrity, your mendacity, and your meanness. Neo-populists say that the people's only response is rebellion. Civil disobedience using all means of available political participation to impose the rule of law on the people's government is a rally cry for the people. Like King and Thoreau before us, we stand in situations where there's an absence of rule of law. We stand for the rule of law, and we'll do everything that's necessary. Finally, as neo-populists with the will to impose a political agenda, we admit to an internal disposition of hope. Hope! We are optimistic. Due to this hope, we have faith that we can make a difference. even though the situation without us would be rather hopeless. Thank you very much.